Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to My Favorite Mistake. Our guest today is Tom Applegarth. He is Vice President of Human Resources at Preferred CFO. That's a company that provides finance, accounting, HR, and payroll support for small companies. You can learn more at preferredcfo.com. Well, Tom brings more than 30 years of experience to the conversation today. He's worked at high-profile companies including Goodyear Tires, Payless ShoeSource, and Amoco, with HR experience across the United States as well as Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Tom's experience has brought significant and measurable improvements in employee engagement, attrition reduction, and recruitment of the best and brightest employees, and establishing high-impact HR processes and improvements. So, Tom, with that, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I am doing well. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing all right. Did you leave the job at Payless because Payless still good? Payless ShoeSource is just really difficult to say.
Yeah, that's not why I left, but yeah, that's why we just called it Payless.
Payless Shoes is easy. Yeah, okay, that's easier. And I stumbled through that. The first time I tried was even worse, so I bailed out. I decided to hide that mistake because it's worse than what's getting published here. So I'm not going to try saying that company name again. Preferred CFO is less of a mouthful. So we're going to talk about that and some HR questions here with Tom today. But as we always do, Tom, I'm going to hit you with the main question: the different things you've done in your career. What would you say is your favorite mistake?
So my favorite mistake was when I was working for a manufacturing company that will remain unnamed,
Yeah.
but I was the HR person for one of the divisions, and we had a plant manager who got a new boss, and so I remember the new VP of operations came in, and he was there for maybe a month. And he called me up and said, we need to fire this plant manager. And I was like, oh, all right, let's talk about why. And he went through kind of all the metrics that they were measuring, all the plant managers that reported to him on, and this person was just the absolute bottom. And I said, well, he's been working with us for 30 years. So you becoming his boss after a month, we probably can't just go firing. So let's sit him down, go through a discussion with him and tell him what metrics that he's not meeting, and then give him a month or two, and then let's reassess the situation. So he did that and came back 2 months later and said, it hasn't improved. Has not improved at all. I said, and I want to fire him. Yeah. He said, well, let's now give him a written warning. I mean, he's been working with us for 30 years and you've been his boss now for like 3 months. So let's give him a written warning and spell out again what you did verbally before and kind of outline, this is where you need to get. And if you don't get there, we're going to need to terminate you. And let's give him another couple of months. And so he did that. And then he came back and he said, it hasn't improved at all. I really, really just need to fire him right now. I said, let's give him one more kind of final written warning. I mean, the guy's been here for 30 years. Let's give him one more and then give him another couple of months. And if he doesn't do it, then we'll go ahead and terminate him. So he did that, came back. So now it's been like 6 or 7 months and he hasn't improved at all. And so I said, all right, I'm okay terminating him, but he's been with us for 30 years. So let's give him, pretty significant severance. I said, let's give him 6 months of severance. And the VP of Ops said, no, you drugged this out, Tom, for 7 months. I just want to terminate him and I don't want to pay him severance. I don't want to take that hit on my P&L. I just want to do it. He said, no, he's been here for 30 years.
At some point, sorry to interrupt, but at some point there's like corporate policy that would dictate.
Yeah. And in this particular company, we had a policy if it was a job elimination. We didn't spell it out. We had a labor attorney who wanted to leave that flexible.
Mhm.
I'm like, that's fine. But our policy was 1 week per year of service up to a maximum of 26 weeks for
Right.
a job elimination. So that's definitely what I was using as a rule of thumb for sure.
But the VP would say this is for cause. This is not
Yes.
a
Yes.
layoff.
Yeah.
This is a
Because, yeah, we were
firing.
right. This is for cause. And there were definitely sometimes, especially if it was a short tenured employee, there were times when we would terminate people for cause and not give them any severance, but in this case, 30 years, new boss, 7 months. I'm like, no, this is just a real problem if we don't give them any severance. But the VP was absolutely adamant we not get any severance. I said, well, let's go talk to your boss, the division president.
Okay. Is this the tiebreaker then? Yeah.
Yeah, let's just go talk to him, because if this thing blows up and he gets an attorney, and I said, so we went and talked to the division president, and the division president was also like, no, we're not giving him any severance. So at that point, I went and grabbed the corporate labor attorney and said, come help me, man, because these guys, I think, and of course, labor attorneys are always the most conservative person in the room. So he was absolutely on my side.
Yeah.
And said, yeah, we need to give him 6 months severance, but the division president said no. So the mistake was, I should have taken it to his boss, the CEO. I should have elevated it and said, no, we're going to go to the CEO. But
And who did you report to in that situation?
So I reported to the corporate VP of HR.
Okay.
And I took it to my boss, but she was not as adamant about it. But in hindsight, we both should have taken it to the CEO. So we didn't. We got sued, and 6 months severance for this guy, would have been high 5 figures, but it wouldn't have been 6 figures.
Right.
We got sued. And even when we got sued, all along the way, I was like, let's settle this thing. And of course, once he got an attorney involved, the guy wanted well into the 6 figures.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to settle at that point. Everybody was asking me, well, do you think we should have terminated him? Was everything's correct in kind of all of these written warnings? And I'm like, yes, that's all solid. However, let's just settle this thing. Why do we want to drag this out and roll the dice?
Yeah.
And that one cost us $1 million.
Wow.
$1 million. And so I've learned from that mistake. And that's the story I tell everybody who doesn't want to pay severance or doesn't want to settle when some lawyer wants 20 or 30 grand or 50 grand. I'm like, let me tell you my $1 million mistake. And luckily, I haven't had that happen for a long, long time. I've been sued a few other times when they wanted outrageous money, but that's actually the only one that I've ever lost. I've lost some other lawsuits, and it's like, congratulations, you won, and it only cost you $70,000 in attorney's fees.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel like much of a win, but happens.
Well, I mean, at least not out of your pocket. I hope you didn't somehow get blamed for this, even though you had said, hey, we should settle.
I did get a visit from the CEO, and he wasn't very happy with me. And actually, my boss, the corporate VP of HR, had left the company at that point by the time the $1 million verdict came. So I definitely got a black eye out of that. But I swore to him, look, I'll come to you. No, don't worry. Message received. I'll come to you anytime I adamantly disagree with one of your direct reports.
And was the CEO mad that you didn't come to them, right?
Yes.
Or saying, hey, you should have come to me. That was pretty clear. Yeah.
Yep. He said, you should have come to me. You should have brought the attorneys with you. You should have brought the labor attorney's boss, the general counsel with you. I'm like, all right, message received. Now, I don't know if he really means that, because we fire lots of people every day, but he said that at the time when he was writing $1 million check for sure.
I mean, do you have a sense of how mad the CEO was at the division president or the departed VP of HR?
Well, I think he was pretty mad at the departed VP of HR.
Yeah,
He wasn't really mad at the division president because he was like, "Well, that's not what I pay that guy for. That's what
yeah,
I pay HR for, and that's what I pay the attorneys for."
yeah.
So yeah, so the division president kind of got off scot free, but yeah, the rest of us got a black eye for sure.
Yeah. But I mean, I imagine, I mean, to be fair to you here, the politics of the situation, if you go into the CEO is now not only going over your boss's head, it's going over the head of the division president. I mean,
I agree.
you've got to be able to, I mean, you got to think about your relationships with them. That must have been a consideration though.
For sure, for sure. And I had a really good relationship with my boss, and I probably could have pushed her into let's just go to the CEO.
Yeah.
And now that I have this story, I've actually had this happen several more times, and I always use that story, and I'm like, no, let's elevate this to the top. The board probably doesn't need to be involved, but let's at least and a lot of times just the threat of having the meeting with the CEO has helped a division president or two decide to go ahead and pay, a 5-figure severance rather than even having the meeting.
So that story and that cautionary tale has convinced others to not repeat that other company's mistake.
Absolutely, yes. I've probably told that story. In my career, I've probably been involved in either me or one of my direct reports firing 1,000 people, and that happened like in the first half of my career. So I've definitely got a lot of mileage. I don't think I probably got $1 million worth of value out of that story, but I've definitely gotten value.
Yeah. Wow. So one other question, you might not know the answer to this, but I'll bring this up. So I'm trying to think of, I started my career in manufacturing, so I can kind of, picture at least generally some of the circumstances of, some people, people in roles like this. And the question I would ask, and if you say, you might just say, look, I don't know. So maybe it's a mistake for me to ask you, like, over that 6-month period, what was the VP of operations or manufacturing doing to help support that plant manager other than telling him, hey, you need to do better or you're fired? Like, there's a certain role to help coach and help that plant manager, like say,
absolutely,
okay, big shot, help fix the situation.
Right? he actually I think did a really good job, because both he and I spent a lot of time in that plant. We actually brought in we had some Lean Six Sigma experts that we brought in to help. So I think we did all of that right.
Okay. So not just pressure, but some attempts to help and resource.
Absolutely. I think we did a really good job there. This was just a guy who had been running that plant for like 20 years, been working for the company for 30 years, and was, not very coachable, at all. So it was unfortunate.
Yeah. And I can certainly see that being the case. And I mean, I've seen, in my career, the change of a plant manager can make a huge difference in terms of just their leadership style, the way they're going about things, especially in the context of, let's say, lean manufacturing. It's a different way of working with people. It's not trying harder or yelling or pressuring people more effectively or giving rah speeches. I mean, there's different leadership styles that can be effective. And I mean, so do you know then, like, did they find a plant manager that could turn the place around, either internally or
we did.
outside?
We actually promoted somebody who was a number 2 at another plant, brought him in, and a lot of that plant manager's issue when he was getting fired is we were kind of in the implementation of kind of this Lean Six Sigma program, and he was just fighting it tooth and nail. He was just, it was just foreign to him, and he was just one of these guys that was not a continuous learner. And he was like, "That's ridiculous." Some of the things that everybody was trying to get him to do, which is part of, his plant didn't go downhill. It just went from being an average plant to the worst plant as everybody else was adopting, what they needed to adopt.
Yeah. So it sounds like one of those situations of what used to work, or at least what used to get you by, no longer did.
Yeah, the bar had moved. I mean, we had turned into a continuous improvement organization, and all the other plants were improving except for him.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, when I think of, my first job out of college is General Motors. It's no secret what company. I appreciate you keeping the other company name out of it, but General Motors, that first plant manager, and when he was replaced, new plant manager came in who had some Toyota training and this lean manufacturing experience. Even though he was a lifelong GM leader, he would lay out data that we hadn't really quite seen as such, that showed he was taking over a plant that was bottom of the barrel in terms of like productivity, quality. It was the worst plant, not just in the division, but probably the worst performing plant in General Motors worldwide. And that different leadership style really made a big difference and turned that plant around within a couple of years. But in typical GM fashion, that plant manager didn't get fired or pushed into early retirement. He got at least nominally promoted to a job at headquarters. So there's your punishment, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
But in general, I mean, I was going to ask, and you already kind of touched on this. I mean, in a lot of ways, the role of human resources is to help protect the company from problems and lawsuits, and this could be unfair, so correct me on this, but the role of HR is really more to protect the company than to protect an individual worker.
Well, so I think definitely everybody in HR gets a paycheck from the company, and ultimately, you need to do what's right for the company. But I do think one of the values that HR brings to an organization is being the group in the room that isn't solely focused on the company, and that we do kind of play that role of saying, hey, look, let's take a longer range view of what we're doing. And ultimately, to be successful, you need to make your investors happy, you need to make your customers happy, but you also need to make your employees happy.
Yeah.
And so, there's a group that's worried about keeping the investors happy in every company. There's a group that's worried about keeping customers happy in every company. And HR really needs to make sure that people don't forget about the third leg of the stool and only focus on the other two. And really, everybody in the company should be focused on all three. Right. And at least places I've worked at and companies that I've consulted with, it's easy to pick two of those constituencies. If you only want to make two of them happy, it's pretty not easy, but it's much, much easier. The real trick is keeping all three of those constituencies happy. And if you do, you are really in the upper quintile of companies.
Yeah. So I apologize for being a little too hard on HR and the framing of that question. There might be some companies where, maybe HR doesn't have that same focus as you described it, and it kind of gives a bad reputation.
Yeah. Well, and it's easy, there's, like in any profession, there's good HR managers and there's bad HR managers. And I think the bad HR managers don't push back, because it is the natural inclination of most people running a business to really, they have to worry about the investors because they're there banging on the door every day. And even in a publicly traded company, the CEO is pretty worried about the stockholders. Yeah. And when the investor is just an owner, whether or not they're engaged in the business, it may even be a little worse. And then it's really intuitive to almost every manager that we need to keep the customers happy. What may not be as intuitive is that, in the short term, it may or may not come back to bite you, but absolutely every time in the long term, if you're not worried about keeping the vast majority of the employees happy, you are not going to be as successful as you might otherwise. And so bad HR people might react to the manager, and the manager says, do this, and they just go do it. Yeah. Really good HR people, without getting fired, but are good at kind of pushing back, bringing data, helping people understand the long-term, this might be the answer for today, but let's think about a month from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, and is that really the right answer?
Yeah. So let's transition a little bit, and thank you for telling that story and the reflections there, Tom. And this, I think connects to the work that Preferred CFO does and what you're doing there. So you're telling a story about, a really large public company. You had worked for a lot of large global public companies before. Those who are just listening don't know, but I'm wearing a polo shirt from KaiNexus, a startup software company that's now now reached 40 employee threshold, and just hired really first full-time business operations / HR dedicated professional. But when a company like that is new, everyone is either writing code, selling the software, or directly supporting customers. When you're 5, 10, 20 employees, because I imagine, it's just hard to say we're going to dedicate a full-time salary to an HR person at that point. Is it a mistake for small companies to not have an HR person, or is it a mistake to think the only thing is to hire someone full-time?
Yeah, I think both of those are mistakes. So for sure, a small company, might look at hiring a HR person, and maybe it's going to cost them whatever, 70, 80, $90,000 a year. And they're like, I can't afford that. And I think that's really the niche that Preferred CFO plays, is you don't need to spend that kind of money, because, if you only have 20 or 30 employees, it's probably not a full-time job anyways.
Yeah.
But you really want somebody who knows what they're doing, because another mistake that a lot of clients make, that before they become Preferred CFO clients, is they have somebody wearing that hat that really doesn't know what they're doing. Sure. And our government in the U.S., and it's even worse when you go outside the U.S., has passed all kinds of laws that can end up costing you a lot of money if you don't really kind of pay attention to what you should be doing. And then I also think it's really valuable to have somebody who's helping you understand how to recruit the best and the brightest, how to retain the best and the brightest, what you should pay the best and the brightest. And then it's always good to have somebody in the organization who doesn't want to be the CEO. I worked for a smaller company. There was about 250 million in revenue, about 700 employees, reporting to the CEO, and I was the head of HR. And I was literally the only one reporting to him that didn't want his job. And there comes a role you can play when you're not, when you're in the position you want to be in, and you're not really looking for the next promotion. And I could go to him and say things like, hey, I'd like to give you some feedback. And then giving feedback. And it's always good to have somebody embedded in the organization that's talking to everybody from the ground floor up to, the direct reports of the CEO, and then giving them feedback at all levels in the organization. I think that's another important role that somebody needs to play. And it's harder to play if you are still trying to position yourself for another promotion than if you're like, no, this is my terminal position, at least in this company, if not, in my career.
Yeah. When we talk, there's a lot of mistakes a company of any size might make: hiring mistakes, promotion decision mistakes, firing mistakes, as you've touched on here. There's a piece of advice that a lot of people give. It's real pithy. It's 4 words. So let me throw this at you and see if you think this is good advice or not. Hire slow, fire fast.
Absolutely. I think it's good advice. The only thing I'd add on that is, make the severance, something that will keep you out of a lawsuit when you're firing fast. For sure.
Yeah, because that fire fast without. So, and you were trying to help that company. You told the story of building the quote unquote paper trail. It's a mistake to just on a whim fire someone without. You're more exposed to a lawsuit.
Well, so there's lots of factors, and there's definitely no totally black and white answer. But the longer an employee has been with the company, the more, paperwork you need.
Mhm.
If the shorter somebody's been with the company, so for example, if a manager hires someone and then like, a month later is like, wow, that was a big mistake, I need to fire them,
Mm.
that's probably okay. You probably don't need to go through a big long process because everybody knows that in the United States, most states are an at-will employer,
Mhm.
unless the employee can make a case to a jury that no, well, the reason that they terminated me was an illegal reason,
Mhm.
whether it be because of their race, sex, age, they made a whistleblower complaint, whatever. So there's lots of laws on why it's illegal to hire somebody. But for the most part, if the manager was the one who hired the person, and then a month or a year or even 2 or 3 years later, that's the same person wants to fire the person. Well, that gives you a level of protection that's a little different. In my $1 million mistake, um, you know, a new manager coming in and now managing somebody for the first time that's been there for 30 years,
Mhm.
almost on its case, you can say, well, this young whippersnapper became the boss of an older person, and they were really firing him based on age, which
Mm.
is, it's just a much simpler argument
Yeah.
for an attorney to make that may not be correct, but is the reason why you need to take a
Mm.
little more time firing a 30-year-old person who, is well over 40 when they're being managed by somebody who's
Mhm.
around 40.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some things to take into account on your legal risk when you
Yeah.
terminate somebody.
And thinking back to that situation, I mean, it does sound like the VP had data. It wasn't just a matter of personality of coming in and like, I just
Yeah,
don't like that plant manager. And you could
for
point
sure,
to lack of action leading to lack of improvement,
for sure.
but
Yeah.
still there's legal risk because it's still kind of a crapshoot if it goes to trial.
Oh, for sure. There's always legal risk, and
Mhm.
and in most states, they only need 9 out of 12 jurors to agree. So it's not a
Oh,
criminal trial where you need all 12 of them to agree.
yeah.
It's a civil trial where you need 9 out of 12 to agree. And so, yeah, anytime it goes all the way to trial, it's hard. And most jurors are going to be a little biased against the company,
Sure.
and a little more sympathetic, and so you gotta kind of think through all of those issues. um but that's why, I don't think I would have done that differently. I think the guy probably, so since then, we've given severance to almost everybody, and it's like 95+% of the people just sign the severance and
Mm.
they're done. It's so giving people severance and not challenging unemployment when you fire people are kind of the two, guardrails that I've established for
Yeah.
myself over time. That it's like, don't you know don't do those two things, and you're probably taking on more risk. What you pay, and severance for somebody that maybe you only hired, you know, a couple of months ago might only be 2 weeks of severance,
Mm.
and that's
Yeah.
fine. But give them some reason to sign a waiver not to sue you, because it's just cheap insurance.
Yeah. um,
You never know
so
what hungry attorney they might be able to find.
yeah. So I want to ask, you mentioned earlier of people who maybe get fired because they're a whistleblower on something that's an ethics matter or maybe something that they report to an outside body. Um, what advice do you have either for employees or companies in terms of making sure that there's kind of a safety valve or a reporting structure? Forget about like you don't want to see anyone getting retaliated against, but thinking about someone being in a situation where they think they need to become a whistleblower. What are things for that person to keep in mind, and what are some things for a company to keep in mind that best manage that situation other than don't retaliate?
Yeah, I think there's three things that I always recommend companies communicate often and broad. And that's if any employee that has a problem, you should go to your supervisor.
Mhm.
If you don't, for some reason, feel comfortable going to your supervisor, or you go to your supervisor and you don't get the answer that you think you should, go to HR.
Mhm.
If you don't feel comfortable going to HR, and or you go to HR and you don't get the answer that you think you should, I think every company should hire some other company that is
Mhm.
outside a third party, that is a 1-800 number or an email that they can go, and then every single call that goes to those companies should go straight to the board of directors or straight to the owner. I mean, it should be right at the top. And it just, I mean, those, a lot of these companies, and we, and we're happy to play that function as well. I mean, it's a pretty short report. It doesn't go into a ton of detail, but it gives you a little risk assessment. And having those tools in place really almost eliminates your risk of somebody then feeling like they need to go to the government,
Mhm.
or, go to the press or something else, because
Yeah.
you have an avenue for people to really be able to address those issues.
Yeah. Um, how, I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, it seems like, ideal. Go talk to your supervisor, and you talk about a situation where somebody does, maybe gets brushed off. You're told this isn't really a problem. Don't make waves. And, well, that's not what I wanted to hear. But what if somebody from the get go is afraid to have that conversation because they think they'll be punished, or they're afraid to go to HR? Is it a
Yeah,
mistake immediately, to take one of those other routes, or is that more just
no.
a function maybe of the circumstances?
Yeah, no, and I think that's why companies should have that 1-800 number, so that if an employee, just because you don't want the employee to just not report it and sit there and stew on it, and
Hmm.
and it become a bigger issue. So these 1-800 numbers that people can put in place, and when we manage these functions, the 1-800 number, we never part of the agreement up front is the company is never going to get the name of the employee out of
Hmm.
us. We're
Hmm.
going to tell you what happened. We're going to give you those details. If you have follow-up questions, we're the intermediary. You come
Hmm.
to us, and we'll go to the employee. But we will never tell you who that employee is.
Yeah.
And for some employees, in some situations, maybe the employee's right in you know taking that tact and not going to their supervisor or not going to HR, because they want that level of anonymity. And maybe they're right to do so, because maybe they have a bad HR person, maybe they have a bad managers and managers of managers,
Yeah.
and that anonymity is important to them. But as the owner or the board of directors of a company, you want that in place, because
Yeah.
you want to make sure you're going to get that level of exposure to what might be a problem. And ultimately, maybe the employee's still not going to be satisfied with the answer,
Yeah.
but at least you see it coming, as opposed to
Mm.
now you have the government knocking on your door, or you have the press knocking on your door, and it's a surprise to you, and you didn't
Yeah.
you didn't see it coming.
Yeah. So you'd rather, I think, ideally address the issue before it becomes something public.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 Now, so I imagine, companies should probably like regularly communicate, whether they call it the ethics hotline, or, whatever phrase is used, communicate that ear- early and often so people don't forget, kind of keep it
For sure.
front of
Yeah.
mind. And
Yeah, I mean, I think communication is one of those things that everybody knows that they should do, but they don't do it frequently enough. And so, at a minimum, I think the leader of any organization should be in front of their entire team once a quarter. And it's easy to, during that presentation, to have like one slide. Hey, don't forget, if you have any issues, here's the 1-800 number.
right.
And I definitely think that's one way to communicate it. And then having posters all over the place, wherever you have all the posters that you have, having it there.
Mhm.
But absolutely communicate it, and communicate it often.
Yeah. And I can imagine there's a challenge if it's a low trust environment in a company to begin with. Do employees trust the statement, the, that, hey, this is anonymous. I mean, I've been in some healthcare situations where this isn't even whistleblower situations, but just around employee surveys, employee engagement and satisfaction surveys, and this is anonymous. But then people talk and they whisper and they doubt. Oh, I don't think it's really anonymous, and that's I don't know what you do about that, but it's certainly problematic.
Well, I mean, I've had lots of employees say that to me in lots of different situations. And the answer is, and I think this can be, if that is a real concern, and it is in some units, and we've done this before, where that's why employee surveys and the ethics hotline or the 1-800 number or whatever you want to call it should always be administered by a separate company.
Yeah.
And then that company, I mean, I can with a real straight face go into any one of our 150 clients and say, hey, look, we're a separate company and your company's one out of 150 clients.
Yeah.
I would never, ever put my integrity of preferred CFO at risk.
Yeah.
By divulging whoever calls the 1-800 number, because your company's not that important to us. You know, your CEO gets upset. Oh, yeah. Well, okay, yeah. I guess go find somebody else, whatever. But it's different because in that company, the CEO is the most important person. You know, I mean, and for us, it's like, well, it's 1 out of 150. We've got, sales and marketing people who are bringing in new clients all the time. Yeah. If that's the cost of having that client, we probably don't want them anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear when you can hold to a standard like that. So again, our guest today has been Tom Applegarth from preferredcfo.com, or Preferred CFO is the company, preferredcfo.com, the website. Maybe one final question for you, Tom. When it comes to companies across all sorts of different industries, having trouble hiring people in the last couple of years, having trouble retaining people for different reasons. Another expression I hear a lot, I don't know if it's always fair or accurate, so I want to get your reaction to it. Nobody wants to work anymore. Is it a mistake to say that?
Yeah, I don't agree with that statement. Yeah. I mean, I do think, people, because I'll tell you, I've had personal experiences hiring people out of college campus that have been phenomenal and have a great work ethic and are really focused. And so I think that there's a lot of people out there that really do have a tremendous work ethic and want to work. I do think that a lot of things have changed. The job market is much different now than it was when I started my career 30 years ago. 30 years ago, there was no internet. There was, classified ads. It was much harder to find a job. And then there wasn't salary.com and other places where people kind of knew what they were worth. And so I think you have to be a much better employer now than you did 30 years ago, because people can easily find other positions and understand what other positions pay much easier than they could 30 years ago. And so I think, and so for that reason, because the competition is much different than when I started with Amoco straight out of college. Almost everybody started with Amoco straight out of college, and nobody left them. And it wasn't necessarily because they were a great employer. It was just because it was much harder to find a job. It was much harder to understand whether or not you could make a lot more money somewhere else. Yeah. And these days, I think you have to just be a much better employer to attract and retain the best than you did 30 years ago.
Yeah, well, that's well said. And, it seems like, my take on it is, instead of blaming workers or the workforce, I mean, it seems like, it's an opportunity for companies to look at maybe, not just compensation, but culture when it comes to employee engagement and just the environment, right?
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, you have to be in the ballpark from a compensation perspective, which is why I think it's really important for companies to participate in salary surveys and buy salary surveys and have a structure in place to understand who's paid below market, who's paid above market, and who's kind of paid at market, and then understand how you should use that information. I think that's really important for people to do, but you don't have to pay people way above market to retain them. You have to be in the ballpark, and then it's having great managers and great culture and really understanding what each and every employee is looking for out of their career. And then you're not always going to be able to satisfy everybody, but you definitely want to satisfy your top performers. You want to make sure that those people are like gold, and you want to make sure that you're figuring out and bending over backwards to keep those very top performers.
Well, Tom, thank you again for the story and a lot of great advice embedded through all of that. Listeners can, at some point, hopefully benefit and learn from that $1 million mistake and not repeat that. So again, we've been joined Tom Applegarth from Preferred CFO. This has been fun. Thank you. Thank you for being a guest.
Thank you much, Mark.